the INEC has discharged its responsibilities satisfactorily. You mentioned just a while ago Jega's concern, his worry that a contractor in Abuja has not produced about 500,000 PVCs. We are talking about 7 days to the election. Now, it raises question about the contracting process of within INEC itself. Did they conduct technical audits of the contractors to know their technical capacity to meet some of these logistical challenges?
May I come in here?
Yes, please.
Professor Jega was on a sister program yesterday,
yes,
and he explained this very clearly.
Okay.
The Nigerian company has technical partners abroad,
yes,
in China,
yes,
and because they saw that they were not going to be able to deliver all the cards at the time that they were supposed to be, they now got leave to get their technical partners to produce some of those cards.
Okay.
So the contract was not given to an overseas company, it was a Nigerian company with technical partners.
Yes, but in the, you see, in the last analysis, Nigerians
I have not
are
finished.
Yes.
And he promised that the rest of those cards would be delivered today,
okay,
Saturday.
Okay, which is exactly 7 days to the election.
Yes.
Now, my concern is that, as I said in my introduction, we've had 4 years to do this. We've had 4 years to do this. And I think that saying that 500,000 cards, nearly 1 million PVCs have not been produced, 7 days to the election is not satisfactory. And I think that we need to set higher standards for public officials and public institutions, especially a sensitive institution like the INEC. So I'm very concerned about it, and I think that Jega and those who work with him ought to rise completely to their responsibilities, because this is not the responsibility of government. INEC is a truly independent organization, and they have the constitutional responsibility to organize these elections in a way that does not create the kind of logistical nightmare that we are seeing. Now, concerning the security situation in the Northeast, I am particularly concerned about the kind of cynicism that characterizes the way we look at the people who have been displaced in the Northeast because of the crisis. There seems to be an excessive emphasis to make these people simply come and cast their votes for political parties. We do not seem to worry, for instance, about whether they will have time to come back to some kind of normality in their lives. A lot of them, their husbands, a lot of women have lost their husbands. They do not even know where the corpses are. They have had no time to even grieve for the losses they've suffered. Children have not been able to return to school. It seems to me extremely cynical and manipulative for our people, our political parties, to be excessively concerned about whether votes will happen in those places or not. My own emphasis will be to put our people first, make sure that all humanitarian support has been given to these people. We do not seem to see that. I've not seen sufficient coverage of that in the media either. We do not want to know, whether those people will vote or not. We want to know whether those people have had time to come back to normalcy. A lot of those territories that we are occupied for over 6 months by Boko Haram have explosive devices lying all over the place. Why are we so obsessed about people? These are militarized zones, war zones. Why are we so obsessed about people simply coming out from their hidings to vote? Why are we not talking about how the children will be stabilized, how schools will be rebuilt, how people will have time to move, have this emotional transition from being refugees to living normal lives? I suggest that elections should not, in fact, hold in places that are still potentially dangerous for children to return to, for women to return to. Let us make sure that that area is safe enough before those people are able to return. And I think that we should place emphasis on whether houses should be built. A lot of them live in the open. Some of them outside the country in very sad, despicable circumstances in Niger and Chad, Cameroon, and elsewhere. Why don't we put our efforts to see how these people can safely return to their homes, rather than put excessive emphasis on whether they will vote for the PDP or whether they will vote for the APC? So I think that there's a certain kind of cynicism in the way.
So your concern is not necessarily about those conducting the elections in these places, but about the people who are supposed to be voting.
Oh yes, because elections ultimately are about people. And I think that if these people are displaced, these people have not had time to mourn, they've not had time to reconstitute their lives, they've not been able to return to any kind of stability. You can't possibly organize elections there. Let me give an example. In Afghanistan, for instance, Americans simply didn't organize elections controlled by the Taliban, and yet the elections were considered valid. In Ukraine, the whole of the eastern Ukraine were no-go areas during the war, and they have not organized elections in those places. And the elections they held in the rest of Ukraine were considered valid. Nobody is talking about Russian elections in war zones. I consider those areas as still very dangerous places. They need to demine them. They need to make sure they demilitarize the zones. They need to make sure that they provide extensive humanitarian support to children, women, and the elderly. Our own emphasis is not on these things. We seem to be obsessed about people simply coming to vote, and I suspect that our attitude to our people demonstrates once again the kind of limited understanding of democracy that we have here. We seem to have restricted our definition of democracy to simply being people coming around every 4 years to vote. Being responsible to the livelihood of our own people is in fact one of the tenets of democracy. And so when these people are displaced, thousands, millions of them potentially are lost in all kinds of, we need to put the emphasis, not on them rushing to militarized zones to vote, but to make sure that we give as much compassionate and humanitarian support as we can.
Doctor, in discussing the issue of internally displaced persons in Nigeria, it was felt by a lot of Nigerians that even though they are displaced, they still have a right to determine who rules them in this country.
Yes, but if I have just lost my wife to violence, if I have just lost my home, if I've just lost my child in very sad and unfortunate circumstances, in the hierarchy of my own priorities, voting wouldn't be the issue. I would like to have time to mourn. I would like to have time to return to some kind of stability.
I hear you, Doctor.
Yes.
But those in charge say that it is not their place to deprive you the right to vote.
Yes,
they should afford you the opportunity.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that over 2 million people are already refugees in Niger Republic and Chad. We should be concerned about making them return to some life of stability. That's my concern. I'm not saying they shouldn't vote. What I'm saying is that we seem to be putting the cart before the horse. Let us make sure they return, not simply to vote mechanically for these parties, but to return to a life of sustainability, a life of stability. The children should be able to go to schools. People should be able to rebuild their lives. Because elections will come and go every election cycle. But the people that we serve, we need to treat them with some kind of compassion and responsibility. So the voting can happen, but then the government and those who are working in the war zone ought to be able to rise to the humanitarian challenge that we are seeing in that place.
Okay, let me take this discussion another way for a little bit, and I'd like to ask this question of the lawyer. The issue of deploying soldiers, well, military, to polling stations, it has been discussed at length, and we still don't know exactly what should be. Does the law allow deployment of soldiers or military personnel to polling stations?
Well, I will look at that issue bifurcatively. One, short of quoting the Constitution ipsissima verba, short of quoting the Constitution ipsissima verba, or verbatim et literatim, word for word, that is. Paraphrasing the Constitution, it's as clear as the laws of the Medes and Persians, to the effect that military people cannot be deployed for civil functions, save as requested for by Mr. President, and having the legal imprimatur by the National Assembly for civil authorities. So, Mr. President must make the move, and the National Assembly must accept the move. But even beyond that, in our constitutional jurisprudence, when there is any penumbra of dubiety